Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today to delve into the important topic of human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. Before we dive into our discussion, I'd like to introduce our esteemed and distinguished panel of speakers, Dr. Anis Qassem, the Board of Trustees member at Law for Palestine and international lawyer, Professor Michael Link, that he will be join us in online intervention, and the former Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Professor Mehmet Shukru Gözel, the President of the Center for Peace and Reconciliation Studies, and Ms. Lydia Canaan, humanitarian activist and the UN delegate as diplomat artist. So, indeed, violation of the Palestinian human rights, and even worse when we are talking about the international humanitarian law, did not start on October 7th, but we are facing a collection of violations of both IHL and IHRL in recent months in Gaza, and we're also facing a genocide actually unfolding in Gaza. An admirable step that was taken by South Africa, which instituted proceedings against Israel in the International Court of Justice, actually under the Genocide Convention, was admirable. So, our first speaker today, Dr. Anis Qassem, will share his insights on the legal aspects of the situation in Gaza. So, Doctor, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. And I think we are meeting at a very crucial time for the Palestinian problem in general and for our people in Gaza in particular. I'm going to talk about the International Court of Justice temporary provisions that were rendered towards the end of January of this year. I don't have to rehash what happened before the ruling was rendered or the order was issued by the court on January, because I assume everybody is aware of this. What we need to know is that the International Court of Justice, based on reports that it cited, like the Undersecretary for Human Affairs, the UNRWA Director General, the World Health Organization reports, the statements of official Israelis, beginning with the President of the state, the Prime Minister of the state, and most importantly, the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel, in which the minister declared that he is going to close Gaza, no food, no water, no medication, nothing. And he said, and he added, that those are human animals and we are going to deal with them accordingly. Based on these statements, the ICJ found it plausible to reach the conclusion that it is important to issue temporary provisions as requested by South Africa. those 6 orders, ranging between ordering, the court used the word Israel must stop, imperative sense, must stop the killing and the executions under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, to allowing basic needs for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza Strip. And the court ordered Israel to report in a month's time about what it had done to comply with the court's decision. After that month, Israel submitted a report. It's still secret. We don't know the contents of that report, but we don't need to learn that in the interim period between the court order to Israel and the lapse of 1 month, we know that the volume of killing in Gaza has increased, the volume of injured persons have increased, the situation in the occupied territories, or in Gaza in particular, has further deteriorated to an alarming sense. The genocide that perpetrated by Israel is not only limited to use the military force, it is also used by lack of providing the necessities of a human life. The trucks that there were before this incident of October 7th, there were 500 trucks a day entering Gaza. Now they have less than 100 trucks a day for the same amount of population. Now the people lately are suffering from starvation, especially in the northern part of Gaza. The last count of children passed away, 30 children, because of dehydration and malnutrition. The special rapporteur on the right of food states that Israel is deliberately starving Palestinians. The special rapporteur, who is also a law professor at the Law School of Oregon University, said the speed of malnutrition of young children is astounding. The bombing and killing of people directly is brutal, but the children, the suffering of the children is indeed torturous. And that is the situation now in northern Gaza, where people are suffering from real starvation, not only the children, but also adult people. Israel has diversified its type of genocidal methods. It's not only limited to hardware of war, it's not limited to starvation. Now they are using the mass or the forced movement of people from the north to the south, and from the south to other locations in the south. So the disruption of even disrupted life is prevalent in the situation in Gaza. The movement, the forced transfer of population is prohibited under the Article 2C of the Genocide Convention, because this talks about creating conditions that would result in the destruction of the group in whole or in part. The Charter of the International Military Tribunal provided that deportation of civilians in the occupied territory is a war crime. Article 49.6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention also very clear in prohibiting forcible transfer of protected person regardless of the motive. Protocol 1, additional to the Geneva Convention, which Israel did not sign, but Israeli courts are dealing with this protocol in many cases, also saying that the deportation or a transfer of population of the occupied territory is prohibited. Then we have the opinion of Judge Lauterpacht in the Bosnia versus Yugoslavia case, that he cited that the Serbs intended to eliminate the Palestinian control in Serbia, in Bosnia, and he labeled these acts as acts of genocide. No doubt that Israel did not abide by any of these rules, nor by any of the reports by international organizations. Yeah. What I would like to close my remark here by saying that if the International Court of Justice finds it plausible to issue those temporary provisional orders to order Israel to stop killing and to stop the starvation and the mass movement of people, I think it should be also plausible for other states to adopt the same decisions in order to act individually against Israel. We don't have to wait for the Security Council or the General Assembly to resolve or issue resolutions in order to prohibit Israel or to take action against Israel. The states, because they are bound by the Geneva Convention, the state parties to the Genocide Convention are bound to prevent and to punish those genocidal acts. So we are calling on all communities, all civil societies concerns to act collectively or individually in forcing Israel to abide by the international standard of set out in the Genocide Convention. Those steps can be like withdrawing ambassadors, boycotting Israel economically, politically, boycott the Israeli universities, boycott Israeli sport teams. They can take so many actions against Israel like the world community did with apartheid South Africa. There were lots of steps that can be taken to isolate Israel from the international scene in order to force Israel to comply with the Genocide Convention, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wassim, for your good points. Before going to the next speaker, I would like to mention that the only person who is allowed here to take videos are standing over there, and please don't take photos. Thanks. So, as it mentioned by Dr. Wassim, the ICJ found that it is plausible that acts committed in Gaza could amount to genocide, and actually you all know that the ICJ issued 6 provisional measures in this matter. Now I want to give the floor to Professor Link, and I request him to talk about the ruling of the ICJ and the recent cases that instituted by Nicaragua against Germany about the complicity in genocide. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you very much for the honor of being asked to participate in this panel. as has been explained, I'm going to speak in detail about the ICJ ruling in late January. Let's first begin with understanding what genocide is in international law. The term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer who lost much of his family during the European Holocaust during the Second World War. What he did in order to describe this phenomena was to combine the Greek word for race or tribe, genos, with side, which is Latin for killing, to describe what is now known as the crime of crimes. 4 years later, after he had coined this term and lobbied for its inclusion in international law, the UN General Assembly in December 1948, a little more than 75 years ago, adopted the Genocide Convention, which was the organization's first human rights treaty. And in Article 2, the convention described genocide as any of the following acts that have been committed with the intent, keep that word in mind, to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group or causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And so in the last 75 years, the Genocide Convention has been ratified by 153 states, including by South Africa and Israel. So this brings us then up to the present. In late December 2023, South Africa filed a comprehensive and highly readable 84-page application with the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the UN system, alleging that Israel had breached its obligations under the Genocide Convention through its conduct of the war in Gaza since October 2023. South Africa was able to assert that it had the right and the authority and the jurisdiction to be able to bring this application against Israel, because both Israel and South Africa are signatories to the convention, which contains the obligation that every state signatory to the convention has the responsibility to prevent genocide as a responsibility wherever and whenever genocide is occurring. So the court then heard oral arguments 2 weeks after receiving the application on the 11th and the 12th of January, 2 months ago. So in its oral arguments on January 11th, South Africa laid out the scale of death, destruction, displacement, and suffering endured by the 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza, arising from Israel's war in the aftermath of the atrocities committed by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on October 7th. In requesting provisional measures, which in some jurisdictions would be the equivalent of asking for injunctions against a particular party, all that South Africa had to do at this stage of the proceedings was to prove whether or not it was plausible that Israel's military actions in Gaza since October may amount to genocide. So to do so, South Africa had to prove two related requirements. One, that the acts committed by Israel, such as the civilian killings and the injuries, as well as the devastation of the civilian infrastructure, as well as the intentions that could be attributed to the leadership of Israel's government and military, were plausibly contributing to the destruction in whole or in part of the Palestinians in Gaza. So in its arguments, this is all laid out by South Africa. Israel, which argued the following day in front of the court, basically argued that throughout its military operations in Gaza since October, Israel had been strictly abiding within the bounds of international law, and it was the victim, not the perpetrator of genocide. So with these arguments, the court then retired, spent 2 weeks reviewing the evidence and arguments, and on the 26th of January, it released its remarkable judgment that in measured tones that nevertheless contained a damning verdict. It largely accepted the narrative by South Africa about Israel's conduct in its military operations in Gaza. So when the court assessed the plausibility of genocidal acts alleged by South Africa against Israel, the court placed significant weight on the many statements made by senior UN officials since October about the unfolding humanitarian calamity in Gaza. It expressly noted the number of Palestinian deaths at that time, which were 25,700 towards the end of January, 1,000 dead, as well as 63,000 injured. It noted the forced displacement of approximately 80% of the population and the destruction or damage to over 360,000 housing units. The court then gave life to these statistics by quoting the UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, who said in early January that Gaza has become a place of death and despair for children. There's no food, no water, no school, nothing but the terrifying sounds of war day in and day out. And as well saying, Gaza has simply become uninhabitable. And then all of this, in the court's view, demonstrated that there was a catastrophic, and I'm quoting, a catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, which is at serious risk of deteriorating further before the court reaches its final judgment, which would occur after a full hearing 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So that's genocidal acts. The court accepted South Africa's arguments. Then the court turned to whether or not it could be said that there's genocidal intent expressed by Israeli leaders, Israeli political and military leaders. And it quoted 3 specific statements made by senior Israeli leaders. The one I'll quote to you is from Israel Katz, who at that time in October 2023 was the Minister of Energy, and since beginning of January, he's now the Foreign Affairs Minister of Israel. He tweeted in October that we will fight the terrorist organization and destroy it. All of the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They, the civilians, will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world. So while the court in its ruling came to no conclusions about whether genocide is actually occurring in Gaza, that will only be determined after the full hearing several years down the road. It was entirely unmoved by Israel's assertion that its conduct of the war had been within the bounds of international law and that it was doing its utmost to avoid civilian deaths. So, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, the court issued a number, I think 6 in total, provisional measures or orders that Israel had to follow. So it ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of acts within the scope that are prohibited by the Genocide Convention. It ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent and punish any intent to incite genocide within the Israeli public. And thirdly, and the one I'm going to concentrate on, it also ordered Israel to take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians in Gaza. And what's quite remarkable for this relatively conservative and restrained court is that these provisional measures were ordered and voted on by either a 15-2 majority or a 16-1 majority. So, alas, what was missing in the provisional orders issued by the provisional measures ordered by the court was South Africa's request for an immediate suspension of Israel's military operations in and against Gaza. To my mind, this is the hole in the heart of the ruling. I call this decision a glass 3/4 full. Although South Africa correctly argued after the judgment was released that Israel could only comply with the provisional orders by agreeing to an immediate ceasefire, the absence of the order for a ceasefire has allowed Israel the wiggle room to reinterpret the rulings in its own favor. You know, the initial reaction of Israel when the decision was released on the 26th of January was to call the ruling anti-Semitic and outrageous. It then changed its tack several days later to argue that because its military operations have always been consistent with international law throughout the conduct of the war in Gaza. Therefore, it remains in compliance with the orders for provisional measures. And I'll come back to that in a second. I do want to point out that this ruling indelibly stained Israel's international standing, but it's not the only damaged party. The ruling has also blemished the reputation of those countries in the global north, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, which have stood by Israel politically and militarily throughout the war while belittling South Africa's application. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in early January, after South Africa had submitted the application, that this application was meritless and it distracts the world. Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, said that it was completely unjustified and wrong. And once the ruling came out, the United States took the position, and I'm quoting John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesperson in the United States. He said, there's no indication that we've seen, he said, that validates a claim of genocidal intent and action by the Israeli Defense Forces. Then, of course, as we all know, within a day or two, the world's attention was shifted from the ruling by the International Court of Justice to these thin allegations against UNRWA, the UN agency which services the Palestinian refugee population, that a small number of its employees were engaged in what happened on October 7th. Now, the International Court of Justice has no army or no police to enforce its legally binding rulings. Its authority is entirely based on the willingness of states who are acting in good faith to comply with its legal orders, particularly where they are on the losing side. When the court issued provisional measures several years ago against Myanmar with respect to the allegations brought to the court by the Gambia on the allegation that Myanmar was committing genocide against the Rohingya people in Western Myanmar, a number of countries in the global north, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, issued a joint statement which says, we welcome the court's ruling, and we say that the ICJ is a pillar in the rules-based international order and has a vital role to play in the peaceful settlement of disputes. No such reaction when the court issued the same type of provisional measures against Israel in this particular case. Now, what's happened with respect to the ruling since it was issued in late January? The humanitarian situation, the humanitarian catastrophe, has only worsened. In January 2024, there were an average of 150 trucks daily carrying humanitarian aid entering into Gaza. In February, there was a drop by almost 50%. Only the average number of trucks carrying humanitarian aid entering into Gaza dropped from 150 to 95. So we know now that there's widespread famine and starvation, that every one of the 2.2 million Palestinians living in Gaza is entirely food insecure. Earlier this month, 12 Israeli human rights organizations issued a statement saying that Israel was not complying with the provisional measures, particularly with respect to the allowance of sufficient humanitarian aid to get into to Gaza.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. Please conclude your speech in 1 minute. Thanks.
Okay, I'm wrapping up. Okay, so earlier this week, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk said this week that starvation may constitute a war crime. Starvation may constitute a war crime, and indeed, under the Fourth Geneva Convention, the starvation of civilian population during conflict is a war crime. Let me just conclude with quoting from one of the lawyers acting for South Africa in January, who argued at the court with respect to the efficacy of international law. She said that this case brought by South Africa represented a pivotal challenge with respect to international law itself. In front of the court, she said, some might say that the very reputation of international law, its ability and willingness to bind and to protect all peoples equally hangs in the balance. I think her words are equally true today with respect to how this decision has been applied with respect to the actions of Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Link, for your intervention. Actually, the war in Gaza has resulted in an unprecedented level of destruction. Its economy, which take place, actually will take tens of billions of dollars and decades to reverse. Now, I want to give the floor to Professor Mehmet Shukr Gozel, and he will talk about some legal issues about the war in Gaza and finance of the reconstruction of Gaza. Professor, the floor is yours.
Dear Mr. Mehdi Brat, many thanks and many thanks for the invitation. Today, what I am to say here are all prepared with a legal background, subject to any future advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, and what I am here to say are binding under the UN Charter. Today, in reality, the reason why Palestinian problem cannot be solved is originating from an international wrongful act of the UN Security Council resolution, a wrong word used in the Security Resolution 242 of 1967, which is the only obstacle for the Palestinian problem. But let me begin from the last, and the finance of the reconstruction of Gaza under the UN Charter by the UN. We can finance the reconstruction of Gaza by the natural gas in the East Mediterranean Sea according to the exclusive economic zone of the Palestinian state. As of today, the territory of Gaza legally belongs to the United Nations. And till the day Palestine state becomes a member state to the UN under the UN Charter, Gaza belongs to the UN because of an unfinished decolonization process for the Palestinian people, and the natural gas in the exclusive economic zone of Gaza can be used as an obligation for the reconstruction of Gaza. Also, a permanent salary can be given to the all Palestinians, like the Alaska indigenous people, that the US is given from the natural gases. Now, the reason why today we have the Palestinian problem is originating, as I mentioned, from a wrong word used in the UN Security Council Resolution 242 of 1967, by which Israel thinks that the two-state solution is subject to its approval. And this wrong approach of Israel is the international wrongful act of the UN Security Council. Now, if we need to, as an obligation to correct this wrongfulness, let me tell you what is the obstacle for the solution of the Palestinian problem till today. In the operative paragraph 1 of the Security Council Resolution 242, adopted after the Second War, 1967, the Security Council asks the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from the territories occupied in the recent conflict. This is the sentence, is the main reason that is preventing the peace in Palestine. Now, when the Security Council used the word recent, but not the word all the conflicts, the Security Council in this resolution violated the UN Charter and as well the international treaties between the UN and the Israel. I will mention the forgotten international treaties between the UN and Israel. But the worst is that this legal mistake of the Security Council makes Israel to think that it has got a right to oppose two-state solution, and worstly and dramatically, Israel thinks that Israel has a right to conquer the territories of the Palestinian state that are written in the General Assembly Resolution 181. Now, this is an important point. Everybody says that General Assembly resolutions are advisory opinion and not binding. But General Assembly Resolution 181 has a different character, and it is regularly binding. I will not enter the details, but the General Assembly Resolution 181 is a decolonization agreement made by the UN, and because the United Kingdom, in general, when there is a decolonization process is made, a decolonization agreement has been made. when the UK gave it to the United Nations, this resolution has been adopted and it has a binding character of a decolonization. There are some other details I will not enter. And secondly, General Assembly Resolution 181 had created boundaries between the two new states based on decolonization process of the United Nations. And with this resolution of the General Assembly has a binding character and gives Erdogan's responsibility to be protected by all member states and the international community as a whole, and the jus cogens character. Secondly, the forgotten international treaties between Israel and the UN on the boundaries of Israel. This is the important point. We have got forgotten international treaties on the legal boundaries of Israel state. What are they? It's very simple. On 29 November 1948, Israel applied to the membership of the UN by a letter. In the first paragraph of the letter, Israel had linked its admission to the UN with the General Assembly Resolution 181 and attached its declaration of independence issued on 14 May 1948. In the Declaration of Independence of Israel, the territory of Israel defined in the General Assembly Resolution 181. And secondly, the wording of the termination of the British mandate for Palestine used two times in the Declaration of Independence of Israel, and Israel linked its right to exist by the Chapter 11 of the UN Charter, that is the International Trusteeship System. When Israel's Declaration of Independence linked itself with Chapter 12 of the UN Charter, the declaration itself gained an Erdogan's character, and it incorporates with a jus cogens norm, and as Israel's claim legality with its existence subject to the colonization chapter of the United Nations Charter. And Israel admitted to the UN on 11 May 1949 with the General Assembly Resolution 273. The important thing is that Israel admitted to the UN with the UN General Assembly Resolution 273 after the first Israel war. But when we see in 1967, the resolution of the UN Security Council said that the territories Israel conquered after the first war as if it is legal. But the UN General Assembly accepted with the Declaration of Independence of Israel and the letter, and it linked itself with the General Assembly Resolution 181 of the territories on the day of 14th May 1948. And when Israel became a member of the United Nations, the Declaration of Independence of Israel and the letter given to the United Nations Security Council became international treaty between the United Nations and Israel. Now, as long as conquest and acquisition of any territory by using force is forbidden by the UN Charter, the Security Council has an obligation to prevent any conquest or taking territory by use of force. But unfortunately, the Security Council Resolution 242, by using a wrong word, legalizes, by violating the UN Charter, the conquest of the territories of the Palestinian state by Israel. And when the General Assembly, but we have to say one thing. The UN Security Council gets its power from the UN Charter. And the UN Security Council has no legal authority to change the territory of Israel and change the territory of the Palestinian state. It is the violation of the United Nations Charter. And the Security Council resolution, when defined the territories of Israel before 1967 war as if it is legal, it is a violation of the UN Charter. Now, when we go to the General Assembly Resolution 67/19 of 2012, when Palestine is accepted as an observer member state subject to the resolution of General Assembly 181, in fact, the General Assembly nullified the Frankfurt recent of the Security Council Resolution 242 of 1967. But still, the General Assembly did this without knowingly. I will show another international wrongful act of the UN General Assembly. We have to understand that when the Security Council recommended Israel to the membership subject to the territories written in the General Assembly 181, in fact, the Security Council recognized the existence of the future member Palestinian state with its territories as written in the General Assembly Resolution 181, and the U.S. Security Council has no legal authority to change it in the resolution by the 242. And I've got just 1 minute to finish. To end the Palestinian problem, the Security Council must correct this wrongful act. If not, in reality, the General Assembly has the legal power originating from the UN Charter to correct this wrongfulness of the UN Security Council resolution. And for the membership of the Palestinian state to the UN, in fact, the UN Security Council accepted the legal boundaries of Palestinian state. It can never change. And when General Assembly accepted the Palestinian state as an observer state, there is no obstacle for the any state to use the veto power. And if any state is to use the veto power, there is other methods, I will not enter in detail, to make Palestinian state to the member of the UN. And my last word is that sometimes the General Assembly doesn't know what they are doing. I will just show that when the General Assembly asked advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice in 2022, they also used this wrongful decision of the Security Council and asked advisory opinion for the territories occupied since 1967. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your points. As you know, the Rome Statute in Article 7 declares that apartheid is a crime against humanity, and the former Special Rapporteur on the OPT stated that the Israel occupation of Palestinian territory is also apartheid. In this line, I want to give the floor to Ms. Lydia Cannon, the humanitarian activist, to talk about the devastating inhuman, catastrophic, and apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territory, and also the right of Palestinians to resist. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to kindly ask you all to please join me in a moment of silence to pay respect to all of the fallen victims and martyrs in Gaza, in the West Bank, in South Lebanon, and to Aaron Bushnell. Thank you. The world has failed the Palestinians. The world has failed Palestine, and thus the world has failed humanity. I am ashamed to be human. I am ashamed of this world that has allowed a genocide and an ethnic cleansing that had started back in the 20th century to continue unabated into the 21st century. History did not start on October 7, 2023. The Palestinian population have been living the Nakba of 1948 every single day to this day. And the Zionist apartheid Israeli regime has never ever been held accountable, neither for its past massacres and atrocities, nor for its current apocalyptic genocide and forced starvation against the Palestinian population in Gaza. Prior to October 7, 2023. The world hardly heard of Gaza, much less knew it existed. But Gaza has awakened the world from its deep slumber and confronted its indifference. Gaza has decolonized the minds and hearts of people worldwide and exposed to them the true face of the oppressor. And what kind of an oppressor? An occupier, colonizer, a brutal apartheid Zionist Israeli regime sustained by domination, racism, discrimination, and segregation. A regime that thrives in impunity, unequivocal support, and political cover from its staunch ally, the United States of America, and also from the European Union. A regime that poses an existential threat to the Palestinians and their land, to Lebanon, to Syria, and to peace and stability in the Middle East. Gaza has exposed the true face of Western governments, their indifference, inhumanity, their dehumanization of the Palestinian people, and most importantly, their complicity in the current genocide taking place in Gaza. And genocide is not only killing masses of people, it is also intentionally destroying and erasing their homes and institutions, their culture and identity, wiping them off the map and of history books. Zionism and apartheid are a threat to civilization. The Zionist ideology is a white supremacist, racist, colonial ideology, and it's the driving force behind the ongoing apartheid that has brought havoc, ethnic cleansing, mass expulsion, brutal occupation, massacres, atrocities, and genocide in occupied Palestine. The historical context of the founders of Zionism starkly reveal in every single one of their manifestos that it's a colonial movement. And this colonial movement has been ongoing for 76 years. Think about it, 76 years. Decades of unimaginable horrors and sufferings, crimes against humanity, oppression, persecution, extrajudicial killings, kidnappings, imprisonments, racism, discrimination, human rights violations, and inconceivable injustices systemically and systematically inflicted upon the Palestinian population. And although every state has an international legal obligation to prevent atrocities, war crimes, and genocide, not a single Western government has interfered to stop it. And why? It is more than evident, because they are all complicit. All complicit. All they do is to lecture to the world, especially to the global South, about human rights, about freedom, justice, and equality, while they deliberately turn a blind eye to the colossal ongoing injustice in occupied Palestine. And what a mockery and a travesty of the UN Charter, of international law, and of justice. It's important here to note that on November 10, 1975, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 3379, determining that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. But in 1991, it was revoked under pressure from the United States after US Presidents George W.H. Bush personally introduced the motion to revoke it. Governments never start movements or revolutions, not even resistance. It's the oppressed people who ignite it. And Palestinians have a right under international law to resist oppression, settler colonialism, and occupation with arms. It's even sanctified under international law. And unlike what the complicit Western media, the mouthful of Western intelligence apparatus, trumpeting lies, propaganda, and warping the truth, resistance groups, freedom fighters do not start wars. They rightfully respond to wars and aggression waged against them. Palestinians have the right to claim back their stolen land and the right to self-determination. Governments worldwide must also recognize the Palestinians, refugees, and their descendants to return to their homes where they or their families once lived and provide them with full reparations. There must be international responsibility to end Israeli apartheid, and that means applying all the necessary pressure and measures for its immediate dismantlement. Governments have never defeated apartheid. The solidarity of the people did. Apartheid was defeated in Rhodesia in 1980. Apartheid was defeated in Namibia in 1990. Apartheid was defeated in South Africa in 1994, and apartheid will be defeated in occupied Palestine. Neither apartheid nor Zionism have succeeded in silencing and killing the collective conscience of the Palestinian people, their indomitable spirit, their great resistance, perseverance, and belief in justice and freedom. As a war survivor myself, I retain my faith and my unshakable belief in the power and impact of activism, solidarity, and hope to bring positive change, a dismantlement of the Zionist apartheid Israeli regime, and an establishment of one state, a single democratic state with equal rights for Christians, Jews, and Muslims coexisting and living together in dignity, peace, security, and prosperity. This man-made humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza can no longer be ignored and buried, nor the endemic violence and systematic violations of human rights. And as the legendary Nelson Mandela once said, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Free Palestine.
Thank you very much for your impressive and emotional speech. Now, I would like to ask audience if they have any question. No, please.
Roswitha Kras. Thank you very much. I would just like to add that if there is no peace in the Middle East, there will be no peace in the world. And that's why actually also the world teacher and for all humanity and architect of the global transformation, as well as 14 masters of wisdom are now in a physical body, ready to guide us through this difficult transition and to help us create a new world of sharing, trust, justice, peace, cooperation, and unity of all humankind. But they cannot just come and interfere with our free will. They need an invitation to work openly together with humanity. Let us therefore now, all of you, and also the media, invite them so that they can step forward as soon as possible, as we need them now urgently. Loka, Samasta, Sukhino, Bhavantu. May all the beings in all the worlds be happy. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace within us, peace within the world, in the nations, and peace in the entire world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, it is your turn, yes.
First, I thank ODBB for this important side event, but I will suggest a recommendation, because it's not enough only to describe what happened now in Palestine. The media, everyone knows. The strange, what I encourage, I encourage the civil society and the human right organization to raise their voices, to make workshop why Human Rights Council is still silent. 6 months, no meeting, no any declaration about what happened in Gaza, in West Bank, in South Lebanon. This is the most thing we must workshop, and push the Human Rights Council to take steps against Israel, against American state. She is the leader of this horrible war. This is what I suggest to friends in ODVV, and also we suggest to continue solidarity with Palestinians. We invite you by the name of Khiam to share us Friday, 22 March at 5 o'clock near the broken chair at 5 o'clock, and also 21 another solidarity with Gaza and all Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your suggestions and recommendations. Any other? Yes, okay. Yes, the floor is yours.
إضافة إلى ما ذكر، أولا أنا أريد أن أعبر باللغة العربية. نحن من الداخل
Please ask your questions in English. If you cannot speak English, please say it in a short sentence, and
Even
if it is possible to you.
أوكي باللغة العربية ممكن؟ نعم. إضافة إلى كل ما ذكر، أريد ضمنا إلى هذه القضية. فنحن نتعرض لممارسات عنصرية في الداخل. نحن نسكن في الداخل وما نسمى بعرب 48، ننتمي إلى الطائفة الدرزية التي تتعرض لتمييز عنصري بمنعها من ممارسة حقها في التواصل مع أهلها وممارسة شعائرها الدينية، وفرض قوانين عنصرية بمصادرة أراضيها وتضييق الخناق على شبابها اقتصاديا سياسيا واجتماعيا ومن جميع النواحي. أرجو اعتبارنا جزء من هذه القضية. وكذلك فرض علينا قانون التجنيد الذي نحاربه منذ فرضه منذ العام 1956. وأرجو اعتبارنا كجزء من هذه القضية.
Okay, the gentleman right now, what I understand is that he comes from Palestine and he wants to appeal to everyone, and that his voice is being heard, that they are the Palestinians of 1948 who live inside occupied Palestine, and they are being persecuted for their religion, and their religion is the Druze religion, and they are the minority there, and they have been systematically and systemically persecuted and oppressed by the apartheid state of Israel, with not allowing them to exercise their human rights and their rightful religion, and they even force them to enlist in the army, into the IDF, which they do not want to take part of it, but they are being constantly pressured against it.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for participating in this session. Hope to hear good news in Gaza. See you later. Goodbye.
Thank you.